So I have started packing to go to Ngome on Friday, to Our Lady of Ngome. And Pandora was watching me with this suitcase, and as always, the minute she saw a suitcase come out, she got all suspicious. Because in her experience, the minute a suitcase comes out, somebody is going somewhere, it doesn't matter who, and she is getting left behind. So I watched this and I said, "But Pan, I'm going to take you with." And she looked in the suitcase and she looked at me as if to say, no, that wasn't going to work. Immediately. So I watched her, and the whole afternoon she's been sniffing out the suitcase, she's been walking around it, and every time she went close to the suitcase again, there'd be another bubble pop off her head, like, I wonder where she's going, or who's going, or the last one was, why am I not going? And she got stuck on the why am I not going, despite the fact that I had said, but Pan, you're going too. And I realized the dog doesn't trust me. She just doesn't trust me in a suitcase in the same space. So I decided to pack her collar, and I put it in the bag, and her leash, and she still looked at me as if to say, so you're taking my collar and leash somewhere, are you? And I thought, okay. Until she actually gets in the car with me, she's not going to believe that I'm going without her. And actually, if I look at it from her perspective, based on her past experience, her current observations will be tainted by all of her memories of 4 years of being left behind after I packed a suitcase. And last week when we talked about observations and we talked about how important it is to observe and not be in judgment, we also talked about how past experience colors our observations and turns them into perceptions. But I realized watching Pandora today that was a big topic actually, because our observations that then color our perceptions, so that our perceptions become our observations. We're so ingrained in what we have perceived regularly that we don't realize as human egos that those perceptions are not neutral, that there is an underlying prejudgment in place. So here I might be perceiving something and saying, okay, I'm detached, I'm neutral, I'm simply perceiving it, I'm allowing it to be what it is. But the mere fact that it is a perception means that it is colored by past experience, it is colored by past attitudes, it's colored by a whole range of things. And when I do couple counseling especially, I am always so amazed at how the story shifts and changes, or the experience gets retold in terms of the space from which the perception is coming. So recently I had a client who was complaining about her husband, which is not unusual here, but when she was complaining about her husband, she was giving me a list of things that he does that just annoy her, irritate her. And he was saying, but I remember when you liked that, and I remember when you told me to do that, and I remember when you thought that was cute. But she was on a roll. And that's what we do. We get on a roll, and when we're on a roll in our minds, never mind venting or ranting and raving outside. And I think men do this as well, Clyde, because I've seen it with my male clients. Inside, we get on a roll in a specific way of perceiving and experiencing and therefore not observing. And that role narrows our vision. So everything that we see, everything that we perceive, or everything that we receive is now in terms of the role we're on, that spiral we're on. So when people fall in love, the person they've fallen in love with can do no wrong. And then of course when they fall out of love and they're breaking up, everything he did was wrong. I love when we go to these extremes. And the retelling of the memory, the retelling of the story changes, which puts hindsight in a very dangerous position actually. Because with hindsight, we can rationalize, we can re-explain, we can remember our memories to make them specifically oriented to specifically color a situation in order to make ourselves right, taking us so far off the realms of observation into complete and utter entanglement and attachment. Now, Pandora has become overly attached to my suitcase. The only time she is not watching my suitcase is when she is watching me or being in the same room with me. And as human beings, we do that. We become stalkers. I hear lots of couples where the girlfriends are telling me all about how they went onto that Facebook page to check who he's talking to now, and did he make new friends, and has he changed his relationship status, and what is he liked and what is he not liked. And at age 51 I'm thinking this is just downright absurd behavior, until I catch myself looking at my WhatsApp and saying, oh, when last were you online? And I think, oh my God, this is just a different kind of stalker behavior. But this human brain that wants to prove itself right begins to perceive from a space of rightness. And when we have taken something personally, when we're having a fight with somebody, when we're overly loving somebody, then we have to make ourselves right in terms of the way we perceive. We have to then categorize everything that they do in terms of that rightness that we have chosen, and it's got nothing to do with the person anymore. They're just being who they're being. Our interpretation, our perception, our experience becomes completely tainted with what we want or desire or yearn for or become attached to underneath. And when I look at the big picture, I get really sad, because we've done exactly the same thing with God. God in all of its glory really does not exist as this wonderful man in the clouds with the long white beard or a big trident or any of these other fabulous pictures. But what we've done is that we've taken our attitudes and our perceptions and our experience and created God depending on our mood. So there are days where he is to blame for everything, and there are days in which we are grateful to her for everything. I mean, just depending on our state of mind or faith, or devotion. Thankfully, Spirit is not open to that kind of perception or observation or judgment. So when you are perceiving Spirit, you are obliged to remain in integrity and perceive it or receive it exactly as it is. There is no such thing as simply observing Spirit, because Spirit tends to be an experience. And no matter what your thoughts about angels or guides or ascended masters, their energy systems are constant and present and unchanging regardless of the human condition. And no matter what we bring of the human condition to it, the truth is that we receive from it only as much as we are willing to perceive from it or of it. And we actually have to shift our frequencies, move into greater and greater clarity in order to receive the guidance that is given. So today I was talking to Paddy, and it was as if she was right here, just chatting away, Actually, she was right here, but chatting away in her usual way, giving me all of her Paddyisms and reminding me of things. And at the end of it all, she reminded me, so which one are you living more loudly, Granny? And I thought, oh, Paddy, today I am living the fact that you are alive and well and thriving more loudly. And that's like such a magical feeling for me. And she said, okay, we'll do the same thing tomorrow, Granny. And I thought, that's exactly what I need now. I need a constant reminder in my consciousness, in my mind, in my heart, in my being, that every day I want to live this clarity of observation, that I don't want to come from my yearning and my attachment, and I don't want to come from my so-called rightness and perceive and therefore observe the world from that. I want to see where I'm coming from. Am I coming from my perception, which is tainted by my ego experience and ego decision and the desire for rightness? Or am I coming from clarity, observation, with no attachment to what the other person is doing or being, exactly like I do with spirit, in order to just receive it as it is? So the same system of observation that we apply in meditation and in awareness and mindfulness in our lives applies to our relationship with spirit. The interesting thing about spirit is that it is a really great demonstration of how that non-perception, that non-tainted attitude, and just an openness allows everything to blossom. Because the more we just allow spirit to be what it is, and actually this applies to human beings as well, the more we just accept it as it is, allow it to be as it is, the more it blossoms, the more we can see, the more we can feel, the more we can engage and dialogue and get to know and develop what we call an intimate relating. And even because of the absence of judgment and the presence of acceptance, a loving relating. Are you happy with yourself now? So all through today I've been observing inside myself, where is that thought coming from? Or where is that notion coming from? Or where is that feeling coming from? And if it was a feeling of irritation for whatever reason whatsoever, I immediately stopped and thought, if it's irritation, then that's a perception. It can't possibly be an observation, merely because irritation indicates the presence of a judgment. So let me go and check out the judgment. And of course, I had judged something without even knowing about it. And the minute I cleaned up my judgment, it didn't matter anymore. It was just, oh, that's what's happening. So it was really cool. But what struck me about that judgment is that every part of it, every aspect of it was screaming at me that in that judgment I was taking something personally. Now, for somebody who's been practicing not taking things personally since I met Don Ruiz Miguel over 15 years ago in the 4 agreements, I really should get clapped upside the head big time. I thought, no. Navi, 15 years of practicing not taking things personally, and there you were, taking it personally as quick as a button before even somebody could drop a pin or snap their fingers. It is such an ingrained habit to perceive the world from self, as if self owns the world and self is the world. So that poor woman that I was observing, perceiving, experiencing, judging all simultaneously was really just having a really bad day. Because I said to her, what's wrong? You don't look happy. And she said, I have a corn in my toe and my shoes are hurting. I mean, I can't see her feet. I really can't see her feet. And because she's seen me in the store so often, she feels free to have this kind of conversation. I'm quite sure it's not something she would say to all customers in Pick and Pay. But she was grimacing every 5 minutes. And I watched this and I thought, that is such an ugly expression for shoppers. And I got irritated. Meanwhile, the poor woman is in pain. And it caught me up so quickly. And actually the judgment came from the fact that I was having a purely magical day. And I just didn't want to see anybody else grimacing. Which is really so stupid. Because there's no absolute. There's absolutely no absolute. And it goes right back to that kind of killjoy idealistic thinking about, I'm so happy, I want the whole world to be happy. And now I'm so irritated that you're not as happy as I am. Which is the mind going mad, going absolutely bazonkers, actually. And that level of craziness exists inside and begins to live who we are in the outside world is ridiculous. And it's got nothing to do with age. It's got nothing to do with experience. It's got everything to do with the fact that we are so programmed into a system of judgment. When I look at anything on the internet, and they, like on Facebook, where you can like it or love it or laugh at it or be awed by it, there's a system of judgment. I'm wondering why they don't put in a send a blessing button, which would be so much nicer. A send a blessing button, and then somebody can receive like 30 blessings on one post instead of a like, which would be so much nicer. And sending a blessing doesn't require a judgment. It's just a giving, and it's just a sending of a conscious thought, a positive frequency.
Just got to tap on it.
No, man, that doesn't work either. But just this feeling of we are constantly in a state of judgment. The Trump posts of late have had me vastly entertained, and even that entertainment is based on a judgment. I actually like some of the things he's doing. I think he's really spot on with some of the things he's doing in terms of exposing what America's doing behind the scenes for years now, and he's put it all out there for us to see, which is fabulous. But even under that, there is a judgment, and I can't seem to get out of it. Even when I say to my brain, stop it, you are wasting my energy, you are wasting time, I hear that and I think, okay, that's just another judgment. It's like the whole conversation is in judgment, constantly shifting me out of perception and into perception, out of observation and into perception. Oh no. My tongue's running away from my brain, which is exceptionally lethargic and sluggish by comparison to how fast the information is. That's another judgment. Okay, I'm learning a lot of lessons this week, because one of the things that's becoming perfectly clear for me as I practice this living intentionally, and I'm observing my observations, and I'm observing how being observant shifts my frequencies and makes me more available in every moment to myself and others. There's all sorts of craziness erupting everywhere, as if there are little points where I have to go and tweak this and shift that in order to align or tune in to that frequency that keeps me stable. So I bought purple shoes to get grounded and centered. And there's a lot of craziness going on in my head simultaneously. We're heading into full moon. But in the midst of all of this, it became so clear to me that that system of judgment, which is essentially brain-based, essentially ego-based, essentially conditioning, is sitting there, and I actually have to put a leash on it and take it in hand and walk it beside me step by step like a naughty puppy who requires training. Because when I least expect it, it slips the leash and it goes nuts. It has the capacity to ruin an otherwise joyful moment. And it pops up the most frequently with the things or experiences I find tedious already. I love shopping. Send me grocery shopping. I hate it. It's not fun shopping. So immediately I have to go grocery shopping. I am predisposed to getting irritated. I am predisposed to being judgmental. I am predisposed to coming out of there with all of the joy sucked out of me. Put me in a shopping center and put me in one direction. Actually, put me in an Indian shopping center in India and I'm perfectly fine. Put me in a South African shopping center and I'm predisposed to being irritated. So there are all of these conditions that exist inside, and we actually have to stop and know what those conditions are. Sometimes it's just somebody's tone of voice. It's just a tone of voice. Sometimes it's a word that they use over and over and over again, ad nauseum, and you go, whoa, that just ruined the whole conversation. Like when somebody says like, it's like that. You know what I mean, like, You get it, like, right? You get it, right? Right? Huh? I go crazy. I'm thinking, that's not a sentence. Give me a sentence. Where was the full stop in that? And then, of course, I have to sit quietly and check. Is that driving me nuts because I recognize it? Is there a frequency inside of me that is needling inwardly because it is meeting something on the outside that it knows, that it recognizes? So much as I hate to say, put it this way, everything actually does come back to self. If we recognize that on the spiritual plane, we are in the process of observing and changing and upgrading self, then yes, everything must come back to self. When we do it on the ego plane, then it's selfish, self-centered, self-absorbed, and we are taking everything personally. When we do it from the spiritual plane, which one are you living more loudly, Granny? From the spiritual plane, then it becomes a way of observing self, being more aware of how self is interacting in the world. What exactly is the statement you're making? Who are you being? What is changing and what isn't changing? What is sitting at the core of your being, determining the nature of the beast and is unlikely to change through a simple ripple effect, but actually needs a conscious effort, a pin it down dialogue with it, turn it inside out, unravel it, and put a neat bow on it effort. Some things are more difficult than others. Definitely some things are far more difficult than others on the spiritual plane. And no matter how easy it sounds in the speaking about it or the sharing stories about it, it often feels like there's a real pain inside because it's like soul keeps banging its head against that same brick wall. And it's not just a bad habit. It's not just an addiction. It's an ingrained core of the beast natural thing now. So I look at this and I think we have had aeons of living, aeons of experiencing ourselves as ego and soul simultaneously in different bodies. And of course in this lifetime I've had 50 years of learning this behavior and only 15 years of practicing getting rid of it. And I have to acknowledge I might be practicing for the rest of my life. I mean, even maybe the moment I'm dying, I'm going to say, people, I don't like that coffin. Can we get a plain pine box? Because I'm like that. So maybe the nature of the beast is that I'm always going to be looking at things and wanting to make it more, make it different. And in doing so, I'm going to judge it. And then I asked Shirdi Baba, so is all judgment bad? Because when I talk about it in terms of perception, and I talk about how we take things personally, and I talk about observations, then it sounds like all judgment is a bad thing. And yet we are required to be discerning. We are required to make judgments about our personal safety and judgments about who we make friends with and who we include in our intimate circle, judgments about how to spend our money. We have to make these choices with some kind of system of judgment or discernment every step of the way. So you'll notice I'm now using two words, judgment and discernment in the observation. So I started practicing, and Shirdi Baba said discernment is when you come from kindness, when you can come from a positive space inside you with the intention to be nice, to be loving, to be kind. So then if you're having a fight with somebody you love, instead of snapping straight into judgment and saying the first nasty thing that pops out your mouth, you might stop and remind yourself, this is somebody I love. Be kind, be positive, be a builder instead of a destroyer, and then you will be more discerning about what pops out of your mouth. In fact, you might stop to think about it first. And I thought, but that takes all the fun out of the fight. And he said, any excuse will do. So stop, breathe, be kind inside, and then let that feeling become where you are seeing from. And I thought, oh, it's not about being kind outside to the other person. It's not about coloring them different. It's not about putting rose-colored spectacles on your face so that you see them more kindly. It's you stop and you get kind inside. You go into that feeling of kindness and you start seeing, observing from there. And then I had to laugh because my guides have been teaching me for years to start seeing through the eyes of love. Always seeing through the eyes of love. If you know in advance that you have a predisposition to perceive something negatively, or some person negatively, or some experience negatively, then consciously stop. Bring yourself into a loving or neutral space and consciously choose to see through the eyes of love. Being kind inside then shifts your perception and your reception outside, which gives you the edge in terms of now discerning rather than judging. Easier said than done, because it is so easy for the brain to go into a split-second judgment as opposed to take that split second to breathe and remember, I am being kind to myself. I just breathe in kindness for a moment and then I look at the world. We all want to do things as quickly as possible. So we don't even remember that we can take a moment. That moment is actually ours to take it in order to create a better moment from it. Instead, we leap into the moment, we pounce on it. My God, we're such stalkers. And before you know it, everything has gotten very entangled. And then we have our classic justification, which is that we don't know how to communicate. We have communication problems. We misunderstand each other. And of course we'll wind up with communication problems because everybody is just pouncing on everything and nobody is stopping to just breathe for a moment and create the next moment from kindness, which is the benefit of the art of observation. So I remember when I was learning to observe, my guides would have me sit quietly and gaze at a tree. And I would come away with massive headaches. My eyes would be sore. And I'd be gazing at this tree until I couldn't see the tree anymore. All I could see were the spaces between it. And the trick to do that, by the way, is to look at it at a 90-degree or 45-degree angle, not 90, 45-degree angle, and open up the rods and cones in your physical eyes so that you are perceiving the energy of the tree, the energy of the leaves. And as you gaze at it and you maintain that gazing at it, just breathing and being observant, you start to look through the physical beingness of the tree or the physical presence of the tree, and you see the energy of it. And the energy is constantly flowing. It's constantly a beautiful silvery background, like it's in a cloud, and different colors seem to flow in it as the light shifts and moves. It's a pearlescent energy. And the minute my eyes could see that, of course I wanted to see more and more and more of that. So I would sit and just gaze at this tree and gaze at this tree until the tree itself disappeared and all there was the energy. And what I was seeing was the spaces between the things and the tree itself in complete harmony with each other. And I realized how very important the spaces were, because the spaces was what gave the tree its flow. That all of the leaves were not stuck together, that the spaces between them gave them an opportunity to share, to send and receive between themselves. And when we talk about being in the present moment on the spiritual plane, we very often forget to talk about the spaces between those moments where the flow actually happens, the spaces between thoughts, the spaces between experiences, the spaces between our interactions with each other, so that we actually have a moment of gathering, of absorbing, of becoming, of making intuitive and creative and even logical sense of something, so that we are not reacting from nonsense, So we are not just reacting, so that we can now actually respond with greater clarity of feeling, if not greater clarity of mind. And now whenever I look at a tree, it's easier to see the spaces than the tree. It's always so much easier. And of course, the spaces seem to be shaped pretty much like the tree, because the physical presence of it is shaped that way. And yet the flow just goes far beyond that physical beingness and doingness into a frequency that is so much higher. So for me, when I'm learning how to see people and the interactions between them, it's always the space between them that is more interesting than the two people in relationship with each other. And exactly the same thing with actual things that have an energy, have acquired a history, and when you touch them, they give you information. But it's that flow that gives you the information. It's not the thing itself. So here, in this moment between perceiving something from the ego perspective and observing it from a spiritual perspective or a non-ego perspective or non-judgmental perspective, there must be that space. Even when I went to buy my bracelet, they were selling spaces, and it reminded me that everything must have a bit of a gap, is what Dwayne Wire used to call it. Wayne Dwyer used to call it the gap, getting in the gap. Just this gap between moments, this gap between thoughts, this simple quintessential moment of breathing. And in last week Thursday's meditation, we talked about that gap between life and death. Remember, Maris? Where you go in and out and in and out and in and out of living and dying and living and dying and living and dying so quickly that you don't realize that there is that tiny, God knows it's so small, it cannot be discerned, moment between life and death. All the time. Just that one quintessential moment between the in-breath and the out-breath that is in fact a space where the spiritual intelligence harnesses the life force and sends it through us. So everywhere we go, where we are taking things personally and getting involved and getting emotional and not quite observing and getting irritated or getting all hunky-dory, I'm so in love over Valentine's Day, and then crying our hearts out. Why do people always wind up crying their hearts out later? Expectation. Those moments where we are creating expectations and not actually tuning in to what is the possibility or reality within self rather than with others, all of those moments just gather together and entangle and attach us to the things that get in the way of observation. Okay, I got it. So, one of the things that Spirit is doing is that it's putting a line of energy across the wall, and I'm watching it go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and as it comes back this way, it zips around the corner suddenly and it goes all this way. So I'm watching this and I'm thinking, okay, in my initial perception, I had to stop and just see it go back and forth and back and forth. And then because I followed it, because I allowed it, it expanded. It went around the corner, it zipped around, and now it's going around the room. And of course, I'm not going to perceive it. I'm not going to crane my neck now to perceive it at the back of my head, right? But I can feel it, and I can see it going around the room and getting higher and higher as it flows. And in real life, we don't realize that that's happening all the time. That everything is actually in a cyclical flow. That it isn't just what's in front of us that is real or important or valid. That there's a whole lot of stuff going on to the sides and around the corner and behind us that is in existence, and we cannot perceive it and we cannot really observe it without allowing ourselves to receive it. And that means stopping, allowing, waiting. Just like with spirit, when we take that moment, everything opens up. We just give it a moment to become more. Or just become, not even the more, just become and become and become. And of course it's a moment of quiet. No, they took the line away. Okay. That's a new way of teaching people. I'm not complaining. Suddenly there's all sorts of things happening. So I'm saying this is a new way of teaching, right? Where I'm actually having to observe what's going on and talk about that as opposed to just channeling it or going into the past, which just makes the whole experience of observation so much more interesting and slower. Oh, okay. Slower. Slower. It just brings the pace down. It makes me focus. It makes me see what I'm talking about and see what I'm feeling and see what I'm being shown and then deliver it at a pace that is more easily received, more easily discerned, more easily understood. Okay. No more running on like a straight train. Freight train. Yeah, that's what gets my tongue in a tangle. So impatient. Is everybody in the room impatient like that, or is it just me? Are you impatient like that?
Some things,
Yeah, like just like get onto it and sort it out and make the world go round, and I completely forget the world is going around anyway. I can just stop for a moment and mind my beeswax in my head because the world will continue going around anyway. And of course, when I'm having a really great day, it's like I really want to get into full swing and, as Fatima puts it, run on angel juice and get overly productive. And dear God, I must be exhausting to everybody and myself. Completely lost that freight train of thought now. Okay, back to observation. So, the bottom line of today's discussion was when we're choosing to observe, this awareness of how automatic going into judgment is. That's the first key thing. And the second thing is how our emotions then determine what we are perceiving and what we are receiving. When we are irritated with something or angry with something, then we distort our own reception of our engagement with the world and other souls in it. And that just makes observation impossible. So let us meditate.